You are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. I'm Marcus Benjamin, representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to CanesCounty.com for free. Use the promo code Miami30. And joining with me today, I have Alex Donno, who represents Locked on Canes, one of the great podcasts for the Miami Hurricanes. Thanks for joining me today, Alex.
Marcus, it's my pleasure, and you're one of the real ones, man. Very, very few people, if anyone, puts in the sort of hard work that Marcus puts in, so I'm happy to be on.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. And the hard work that we put in for the spring game was definitely evident. We were out there watching the spring game, seeing what the Miami Hurricanes football team is all about. Interesting setting, though, this time, at Cobb Stadium at the University of Miami, different from Hard Rock Stadium or Dry Pink Stadium. It was a move that Cristobal wanted for recruiting purposes. First, Alex, just kind of tell me your opinion on just the setting of the spring game being on the campus of the University of Miami.
I thought they did a great job with what they had. Obviously there are a lot of people who were very disappointed in the fact that they didn't hold it in a bigger stadium and make it more accessible to the masses. You outlined the reasons why they did it. They really wanted to have it on campus for the convenience of all the recruiting that was going on that day. But I got to tell you, over the years, I've attended and covered a lot of Miami spring games, some at Hard Rock, some at what's now called Chase Stadium, where Inter Miami plays in Fort Lauderdale. Back when that used to be Lockhart Stadium back in the day, which a building that got extremely outdated before they redid it. And this was probably the most fun that I had at a spring game, just based on the atmosphere. I think the way that a lot of people, ourselves included, with the media, but not only the media, were able to be kind of on the sidelines, like really close to the action. Those who were sitting in bleachers, the bleachers were very close to where everything was unfolded. You had former players walking around, you had recruits walking around. It was easy to kind of meet up and talk with people. The campus itself is beautiful. I mean, the palm trees and everything. And I thought that they did a cool thing, like right on the strip that's usually a parking lot, but they had the parking lot closed right outside, and they had like a big line of food trucks. So about anything you could imagine. You wanted to, drink like a smoothie. I had a Jamaican smoothie. They had coffee, all sorts of food, burgers and pizza and stuff. So I thought the vibe was great. And, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the sort of thing, if they want to do events there in the future, whether it be a future Canes Fest or, a spring games in the future, obviously try to pack in as many of those extra bleachers as possible to get as many people out there. But it was actually pretty cool. And I thought for what they had and the space they had there, they did a really good job with it.
Yeah, I agree. It was kind of an intimate type of setting where, you had the families obviously out there. And like you said, the media, we got to be somewhat closer than we usually are during the game. It had a very high school football feel to it. I felt like I was, back in my old days, or, I still do cover high school at times. But yeah, it definitely had that type of feel to it. But I definitely understand why Cristobal did it, because to get the recruits on campus at the same time of the spring game, I think is golden. And it was a golden opportunity for the Miami Hurricanes and staff to really take the kids on the tour, on the golf carts around, and also watch the spring game at the same time. It was a beautiful day. It wasn't too hot. It wasn't a scorcher like it usually is around this time.
It wasn't raining either, which is great.
Exactly. Rain would have been terrible, but it wasn't raining. So I think it was an overall success. And I would imagine that they're going to continue to have the spring game at Cobb Stadium there on the campus of the University of Miami. So kudos to Cristobal and the staff for really kind of making that change because, let's be honest, a lot of those other stadiums just don't have that intimate feel. So I definitely liked what they did there. But let's get to the game, Dono. I mean, there were some explosive plays here and there. There were some standout players as well, and some players that didn't stand out so much as well. But let's talk about the player number one, QB number one player to watch, which was Cam Ward, quarterback for the Miami Hurricanes. I thought he was absolutely excellent on the field, threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. And for me, just no bad throws, no questionable throws. If it wasn't there for him, he threw it away smartly. I really like the way he stepped up in the pocket as well to make throws. So I thought he did an excellent job. What say you on him and any other players that really kind of stood out to you on Saturday?
Yeah, Ward, I think it's safe to say he was the best player at the spring game. And it's nice to know that, the guy who plays the most important position on the field, was the one who actually stepped up most in, the first opportunity for fans to get to watch him play in person. I thought you made an excellent point about not making any poor decisions, which was right. I mean, he didn't hit every single throw, wasn't perfect in his completions. There was I can remember one deep ball that was maybe a little bit overcooked and a couple of incompletions, but all of those were smart, safe throws, and they weren't off by much. And then the actual throws that he did hit, you can see not only Ward's accuracy and arm strength, but you can also see the command that he has over Shannon Dawson's offense, which I think is very important because he's had to learn it in a short amount of time. It wasn't a complete philosophy switch, and I don't think he would have chosen to come to Miami if it was. There's a lot of air raid principles in Dawson's offense, and he was a part of air raid offenses at Washington State and Incarnate Word. So, he's been able to adapt to some of the other stuff. He's got a lot of trust, Ward told us, in the offensive linemen that are in front of him. But, we also, Marcus, we saw a couple of glimpses with Ward of the improvisation. Him, making some, maybe off schedule throws, and the way he's able to direct his wide receivers who always have to have their head on a swivel to see what he's doing when he's able to scramble and escape the pocket. We did see a couple of instances of that, and the chemistry with Xavier Restrepo, that Restrepo, I know he had that great on and off field chemistry with Tyler Van Dyke for the last few years. I don't know if he and Ward will ever be as close off the field as Restrepo is with TVD, but on the field, it hasn't skipped a beat with X. And I think Restrepo is primed to have a big year. I'm also happy to see Ward developing some chemistry with Isaiah Horton there, who's someone I think can step up and have a big season this year. So, all three of those names that I mentioned were guys who really impressed me. On the defensive side of the football, I thought Wesley Bissainthe was the defensive MVP, the linebacker heading into his third year, number 31. Not only does he always seem to be in the right place at the right time, I like his leadership on the field. I think that's an area where he's really grown. And I think since Kiko Maui-Noa, who's, arguably one of the maybe two or three best defensive players on Miami. I'm not forgetting Ruben Bain, of course, but Kiko is like the heart and soul of that linebacker group. He's had to miss all of spring with an injury, and I really feel like Wes has taken upon himself to kind of step up and try to be that same sort of an alpha, and it shows. And Ward talked about this after the spring game that he and Wes enjoyed jawing with each other a little bit. I think you might have even been the one, Marcus, to ask him the question. It was it may not have been you, but somebody asked him about kind of jawing a little bit with Wes, and it seems to be something that he enjoys doing. And some of the young guys really stepped up on both sides of the football. Cole McConathy, number 44, who you can see he's got elite size on the edge and power. And he's trying to develop maybe more of that polish, working with Jason Taylor. Bobby Pruitt at linebacker is someone who I think can factor heavily into that rotation this year. Marquise Lightfoot at edge. He's getting bigger. I know a lot. I was reading some comments from, I don't know why I do this, but I was reading comments from the Florida and Florida State fans who were like, oh, that guy, he's the size of a wide receiver. They expect that guy to be an edge rusher. He's putting on weight, folks. He said he's put on 17 pounds already since January. And Lightfoot, who had a sack and a fumble recovery in the game, he was very active. And then someone else on offense, if we're going to stick with the theme of the true freshman, Elija Lofton was very good as expected. I don't necessarily want him to be like Miami's first or second string running back come week 1 of the regular season, but I think he was the second running back who got on the field. His quote unquote natural position is tight end. He made some catches there as he's made all throughout spring. So those were some of the guys who really stood out to me. I'll mention one more name actually, because he doesn't get talked about nearly enough, but had a great spring game, was Shemar Kirk at wide receiver. I mean,
Yeah.
he kind of gets lost in the conversations because we talk about a few of the other experienced guys like Jacoby George and X, and we talk about the young guys, the JoJos. Ray Joseph also had a really good spring game. I don't want to leave him out, but not as many people talk about Shemar Kirk, who had 2 of the biggest catches in the game. He had it was a good throw from Emory Williams, but he turned it into like 40, 50 extra yards of yak after that. And then he also had a deep catch on a really well-thrown ball from Jacurri Brown. So Shemar Kirk is another one that doesn't get talked about probably enough, but he made a case in that spring game.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with all the guys that you named. Cam Ward, I think was, obviously excellent at quarterback. I thought even Jacurri Brown had his moments as well, where, his first snap, he took it for about 30 yards. And he also had a really excellent throw off of his back foot to Jackson Carver for a touchdown. So I really like what I saw from him. I'm kind of up in the air on who is what the order is as far as the backup quarterbacks are concerned, because what I saw from Jacurri Brown, he made a case to be at least the third string quarterback at this point. I mean, Emory Williams, I thought was decent as well. Reese Poffenbarger didn't really flash a lot in the game compared to Brown and Williams. So that is kind of yet to be seen of what the order will be at quarterback. At running back, I really thought Chris Whitley-Humphrey had a really nice day as well. I think he showed some explosiveness. I think he had a slightly better day than Chris Johnson Jr. But the story of the day of running back, like you mentioned, is Elija Lofton. I mean, this kid is the real deal. I mean, once he puts his foot in the ground, I mean, it's pretty scary for a defender to see a load like that coming their way. So, pause. But I think Lofton definitely is going to be an impact. He's going to be a chess piece this season, where you're going to line him up in a variety of different ways. I thought the tight end group as a whole, because the fact that Jackson Carver got a touchdown really says how deep this tight end room really truly can be, and it can sustain injuries should that happen. I thought the O-line did a great job for the guys that were in there. There were times where Ward looks like he could have made a cup of coffee, just sitting in the pocket. I mean, he had some time to throw, as well as the other quarterbacks. Now in the run game, I would probably like to see a little bit more push. But the thing about these spring games, Donno, is like, okay, well, the offense didn't get pushed in the running game, but that means the defensive line was doing well, right? So it's kind of, a double-edged sword with the spring game when you kind of analyze things. A couple other guys that you didn't mention that I wanted to mention was that Marley Cook. I thought he had a pretty decent spring game, as well as CJ Clark. You really see depth at that defensive tackle position with those two guys, along with Jared Harrison Hunt and Akeem Mesidor once he comes back. And let's not forget the 5-star Justin Scott is on the way in the fall, as well as Artavius Jones. So that defensive tackle spot is definitely solid. And I did also like what I saw from Damari Brown. We didn't really see a lot from Damari Brown during the spring because he was recovering from a groin injury, but he was able to get out there during the spring game and, did make some plays. And I thought he, looked pretty good from a guy coming from an injury. But let's talk more about the freshmen, man. You mentioned a couple. I thought Lightfoot had a great spring game, as well as McConathy. He was going to be a guy I mentioned as well. Bobby Pruitt, I think, wow, he really is probably maybe stirring up a lot of controversy just because he's a freshman that's maybe jumping a couple of linebackers who have been in the program for, over a year now, I guess you could say. So just to see him out there for the first series, Dono, was eye-opening for me. And then, he was making plays. I mean, Xavier Restrepo's first big play where he kind of took the ball for a nice distance. It was Bobby Pruitt who ran him down. So for you, what do you think about this freshman class, and how do you think they can make an impact this fall?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we talked last year during the season anyway, and even before the season about the class of 2023, and yeah, there were a handful of players who made a massive impact. I mean, CC Maui Noah and Ruben Bain were starters all season long. Bain took about every freshman accolade you could possibly take. Mark Fletcher had an unbelievable freshman season. There were a handful of others who got involved, and then for as good as that freshman class was last year, I think this one could be as good or even better. And I'm not just saying that because of the recruiting rankings. They were rated even slightly higher, the entire class this year. But, when we're talking about like two of the guys that we've been mentioning, really three of them that we've been mentioning as guys who have really kind of looked like they're candidates to be the Ruben Bain of this year, are names that people weren't talking about as much before spring football began, right? Because a lot of the players that we've been speaking about, like before spring, of players who could be like the impact freshmen this year, not to say these guys won't be, but we were having conversations about JoJo Trader, who can absolutely be that. And we were, having conversations, of course, about Justin Scott, who hasn't arrived yet. And Jordan Lyle is someone that I'm very high on, who hasn't arrived. Chance Robinson, same thing. But we weren't really having these conversations. Maybe we should have, and some people probably were, about Elija Lofton. Like, I knew, again, I heard so much about his versatility coming out of high school. I just didn't necessarily think he would belong as much as he does, like right off the bat, that he doesn't look out of place whatsoever with the sophomore, juniors, and seniors out there. We definitely weren't. And maybe part of this is because all of these players are from outside the area. And there's definitely, just as far as like what we're accustomed to, because we're so familiar, Marcus, down here with the South Florida high schools and even like IMG Academy, certain schools that are outside of South Florida. Maybe we're not as familiar with the high school football scene in Alabama. I guess we all should be familiar with Bishop Gorman because that's a national powerhouse there in Vegas. But I certainly am not an expert on Alabama high school football. So the impact that guys like Cole McConathy and Bobby Pruitt are having so far, I think these are great stories that guys we didn't necessarily expect to have this much of an impact early are having this kind of an impact. And I didn't even mention Carr, didn't necessarily pop as much as some other guys in the spring game itself. But Carr is someone who really consistently popped in practice for the past 5 weeks. So that's another one, along with JoJo Trader at receiver, that I think can be a really, really good one. And obviously we're maybe a little bit less surprised to see Marquise Lightfoot doing well as a Rivals 5-star recruit. And we won't be too surprised if Justin Scott comes in and does really well. I'm definitely curious to see more of Armando Blunt, who did enroll early, but he's been nursing an injury. So, he hasn't really been someone who's been practicing. But I think we got a bunch of dogs. I think at some point, Miami is going to reach a level that once these 2023s and 2024s start to become upperclassmen, I'm thinking like 2 years from now, you won't see as many true freshmen get on the field just because the upperclassmen are going to be so good. But I think that these last couple of recruiting classes just go to show you the type of talent that this coaching staff is able to bring into Miami. That if these guys can outbattle some players who have been in the program a year or 2, 3 years longer than them, it goes to show you just the caliber of athletes and the caliber of the mental fortitude that they're bringing in. So, yeah, I'm extremely high on this freshman class. The same way I'm high on a lot of the 2023 guys that are heading into their second year. Like someone I mentioned the name Ray Joseph. I think that's someone who can pop quite a bit in his second year. A way that he didn't necessarily in his first year. Bobby and Robbie Washington, same sort of thing. So there's certain guys that didn't get on the field as much last year that I think can break through this year.
Absolutely. Very excited to see what the freshman class does here in the fall. But I do have some breaking news to report right here on the Storm Tracker podcast, Donno. Jacurri Brown has officially entered the transfer portal.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah, so that is something that most people were expecting. I think it's major news because this was a player who decided to stick with the program for the bowl game last year. He was the only quarterback pretty much left on the roster, and he stuck with the program. Obviously, we were just talking about his performance here in the spring game. First day of the portal has opened up today here in the spring window, and Jacurri Brown is the first major name to enter his name into the transfer portal. Best wishes to him, and I certainly hope he does great wherever he goes. But what do you think? Just your thoughts on his decision to leave the University of Miami.
I understand it, of course, because he, when you're talking about a player, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I think he can be, because I think he can be an excellent college quarterback. But when you look at today's landscape, where it's so convenient to be able to transfer and to be able to find a place where you can get playing time and where you can be more of a factor, and his situation here in Miami, for whatever reason, because obviously we've seen some really good stuff on the field, but there have been times during the spring where he's been trending somewhere between fourth string and third string. Now, obviously, the starting job is unattainable for anybody not named Cam Ward for this coming season, because Ward is just he's special, and these other guys, all the other quarterbacks on Miami's roster are younger and they're not finished products the way that Ward is. But when you're kind of projecting how things could play out for the 2025 season coming up, if you feel like you're not in the best position to be the starter the following season, go find a situation that's better for you. But honestly, Marcus, all of this, it makes me sad, because here's what I will never forget about Jacurri Brown. This is someone who has spent, two seasons, 2.5, if you count like spring, at Miami. Loyalty up to this certain point, because he did agree after last year being a weird season with his redshirt year. Stuck around to play the bowl game when they really needed him, because they didn't really have any other options in the bowl game, and had made a decision to come out and compete. And it's someone who's been here developing for the past couple of years. And
Sure.
obviously, one of the players who came in is a couple. You got two transfer quarterbacks. The other one of those in Reese Poffenberger is not someone who's going to start here, but you bring him in from the outside. You've got a guy like Jacurri who's been here for the last couple of years developing. And I've seen clear improvements since 2022. I mean, when he first came in, was rough around the edges at quarterback. I've seen development. He's got great size for the position at 6'5" plus. He looks the part. He runs extremely well. He's got a cannon for an arm, and I think we've seen so much development and improvement with the timing and the accuracy and the connections down the field. And, I don't doubt that wherever he ends up, he's going to keep getting better. And at some point, I think he's going to be a starting quarterback somewhere in college football. So it's obviously, anytime you recruit a player, you start to develop him from within. It's unfortunate that someone else is going to kind of enjoy the finished product and the development, and not Miami. So it's unfortunate. With that said, I can't say we're extremely surprised, because I think things have been kind of trending this way, because we know that it was going to be very unlikely to take 5 scholarship quarterbacks into fall camp. That's just not something any of us expected. And just kind of based on the way things have been playing out in practice, I think we all had a feeling that Brown could be the one who steps away. So I'm gonna root for him. As long as he doesn't go to Florida or Florida State. If he goes to Florida and Florida State, all bets are off. But wherever he ends up, I want to see him do well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with pretty much everything that you said there. I think the question for me is, why did, I guess, Miami kind of let him go here? Because he was clearly the 4th-string quarterback when we saw the spring game. He was the 4th quarterback that we saw come out. behind Reese Poffenbarger and Emory Williams. And based on what we saw from the three quarterbacks outside of course, of Cam Ward, I thought Jacurri Brown arguably had the best day. And I believe he probably had the least amount of reps, aside from Judd Anderson, of course. So my thing is that I think he would probably be maybe like his ceiling at this point for me, I think is like a Malik Rozier.
Yeah.
Like I think which I think, Malik Rozier was a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. And I think Jacurri Brown could have been that as a backup and maybe develop to something great in my opinion. Reese Poffenbarger and Emory Williams, I think those guys are good quarterbacks, but I think they don't have the upside that a Jacurri Brown has. I think Jacurri Brown just has tremendous upside, and I think it's really unfortunate that I guess he is not staying with the team to see what he can develop to maybe next year. Because obviously this is Cam Ward's year. This is the Cam Ward year. But it was all about really, what do you have, for next year? And it would have been nice to see him battle it out with the other quarterbacks for the starting job next season. It's anybody's opinion who should be the backup quarterback at this point. And I think all three of those guys could be a solid backup quarterback. And, with that being said, yeah, it's unfortunate that the guy with the most upside is now the one that's departing from the University of Miami. But yeah, I do wish him all the best. He's a great kid. Always came out there and competed in practice, gave all he could in the games that he did play in for the University of Miami. So I do wish him all the best, but I do feel like he does have a bright future.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I'm also, and obviously, this is disappointing because, like you alluded to, when you project, and I'm getting way ahead of myself, when you project a year from now, who might be the successor to Cam Ward, this takes the highest upside option off of your list now. I do like I am pretty bullish on Emory Williams though, in a way that I see this narrative out there. And I've heard this has been brought up to me probably dozens of times since last season ended. Well, you know who Emory is. This is just a game manager that you can only ground and pound behind this guy, just, based on the two games that he started last year. Well, the two games that Emory true freshman, mind you, starting against the two best defenses Miami faced that year. I mean, I don't know how many interceptions Tyler Van Dyke would have thrown in those two games. I mean, against the two best defenses you played against last year.
Definitely more than
and
ever.
They were clearly, the play calling was scared to death of that, like of knowing, hey, we've got a true freshman going up against Clemson's vaunted defense and Florida State's vaunted defense. Like they were protecting him. They were protecting turnovers. So I do not think it's fair for anyone to judge Emory Williams, who, by the way, did make some big boy throws in those games, by the way. But I don't think it's fair for anyone to say based on that's who Emory is. I think Emory has more upside than a lot of people realize. At the same time, I agree with what you said. I think that purely based on upside, I would take Jacurri's upside over Emory's and over Poffenbarger's. He's probably got maybe a lower floor than Emory, but a higher ceiling than Emory. So
I agree.
That puts you in an interesting situation for a year from now. But who knows? A year from now, they might get another portal guy. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that, right before we close out of this, obviously we went a little bit longer with the breaking news that happened, but it's it's transfer portal holiday day as far as the spring portal window. So when you look at this team, Donno, quickly, what position groups do you think Miami should attack here in the transfer portal?
Yeah, I think you need a cornerback and a safety. I think you could address both of those positions because I think there's there's some alarming depth questions that you have there. And I'm not to say there's nobody good at those positions. Believe me, I'm a believer in Daryl Porter Jr. Jadis Richard at corner has had a good spring, and there's a lot of upside in Damari Brown, who you mentioned, and Robert Stafford and some of those other guys. You had safety. I definitely believe in Mish Powell, who's having a great spring, transferred over from Washington. Jaden Harris has been pretty consistent. Savion Riley has flashed at times. Zaquan Patterson is going to be one for the future, but I think you could use more proven experience at both safety and at cornerback. And, I think running back is a spot that Miami is looking to make a splash, because I don't know exactly when Mark Fletcher's going to be ready to go, who he'd be your featured back if and when he's ready. I don't know when that's going to be. And I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think Trevante Citizen is like that close to regaining like the form he was in out of high school. So if you're talking about like big bodied featured backs, I think that's something Miami could use. I think they might dabble in the wide receiver market if they can find somebody truly elite.
Sure.
If not, I would leave it alone. Like I wouldn't bring in a guy just to be like the fourth receiver, but if you're talking about a guy who could crack the starting lineup, then I would consider it. And I feel like there clearly is interest in edge rushers because they've had Romello Height in for a visit, so they're not going to waste their time with a visit if that's not something that they're looking to address. Miami has lost Nigel Lee Kelly, as we know, and I think if they can find like a marquee defensive tackle, I think they would go for that. Certain positions, I think they're set. I don't think they're going to be in the quarterback market. I don't think they're going to be in the tight end market. I don't necessarily think they're going to be in the market for any offensive linemen unless somebody truly eye-popping gets in the portal. I don't think they're going to be in the market for linebackers, but outside of that, I think they're open to do some shopping.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on all those position groups. I do think they're a little thin at cornerback, just because from an experience standpoint, you don't have a lot of guys who have played a lot of college football at a high level. So definitely would like to see them add a cornerback to the room, running back for sure as well, because I think aside from Chris Wheatley Humphrey, all of the running backs have some kind of injury history at this point. And I mean, even Chris Johnson Jr., he was hurt while he was in high school for a bit. So I think it definitely would do some good if you would add another running back, preferably a bigger running back, one that can help in pass pro. I think that would do them some good to add, a back to that room. And then I think those are really kind of the two you should add to, and wide receiver as well, as you mentioned, because Isaiah Horton is really your only true large receiver that's out there. So, knock on wood. But if he, goes down with an injury, then you don't have another big receiver out there on the outside. Well, we all know how great X is. And then you've got a bunch of other slot, similar type of shifty type of guys in Ray Joseph, Robbie Washington, even JoJo Trader is not the biggest. He's about 6 feet tall. So, I think they would do some good if they can get a 6'3" or higher, as far as height is concerned, type of receiver to add to that room, along with Xavier Restrepo and Jacoby George. They add those pieces, and I think this team is good to go. I think linebacker, they're happy with the guys that they have in there, that they'll continue to develop, just like their offensive linemen as well, that they'll continue to develop. And the quarterback room is still very stacked, even with Jacurri Brown not going into the portal. You still have 4 guys in that room right now. So that is, what we have in store as far as transfer portal options, I think, and it should be a fun few days to see what other players are also going to exit the program, and who Miami also gets to add to their roster. That's Alex Donno, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone knows this guy from the Locked On Canes podcast. Make sure you check out that podcast, one of the best podcasts in the business as well. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast as well, the Storm Tracker podcast. Thanks for joining me again, Alex.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And man, again, with that Jacurri thing breaking again, I don't think either of us were all that surprised, but it's still it hits different. Like when you see it happen, and man, I'm sad.
Yeah, I am too, man. I am too. It's unfortunate to kind of hear that news, but happy for his future and happy that he is, looking for an opportunity where he can get on the field more.
Right. Yeah, no
Absolutely.
doubt. Thank you again for having me. It was a good time.
Absolutely. Make sure you subscribe to CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Use the promo code Miami30 for a free month of Canes County and Rivals.com. And also subscribe to this podcast, the Storm Tracker podcast, on all platforms. And also subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Until the next episode.